She'd been a compliance attorney before she gave it up to raise their daughters. I found her in a small town near Providence, working at a bookstore. She looked tired, like grief had folded into her skin and never left. I approached her carefully. I introduced they promoted me the morning after the partner's body was pulled from the river. I smiled, took the title, and said nothing because buried deep in the firm's archive, I'd already found what got him killed. Now I was next, and someone knew I wouldn't stop digging. My name is Lana Deverux, and 3 weeks ago, I found a discrepancy buried in an archived folder labeled Closed, Q for Roach Group Holdings. I shouldn't have been in that folder. It was out of scope, 2 fiscal years old, and archived with a final sign-off by the partner himself. But I clicked it open anyway, because someone misspelled the word liabilities in the label, and I don't believe in mistakes without a reason. I wasn't always like this. I used to skim. I used to trust what the system told me. But that was before the case in Charleston, the one no one talks about, the one that got my senior suspended and me reassigned. I see ghosts in spreadsheets now, codes and formatting styles. So when that folder popped open and lines 331 to 357 were blacked out, not deleted, just overwritten in solid black, I started breathing slower. Someone didn't want the numbers gone. They wanted them buried where they could still be proven. I printed the file. 2 copies. One went into my leather-bound portfolio. The other, I tucked behind the lining of my desk drawer under a false bottom I'd made after Charleston. I didn't know yet who it implicated or what it meant, only that I'd stumbled on something our firm didn't want touched. It was Friday. I shut the folder, deleted my access log, and walked out of Linscott and Row like nothing had happened. That night, the partner who signed the file, Trent Voss, was reported missing. The following morning, his car was pulled from the Charles River. The firm called it an accident. I called it a warning. On Monday morning, I was promoted. I didn't tell anyone about the folder. Not Audrey, my roommate. Not Ethan, my almost something from IT. I kept quiet, showed up early, and smiled when the managing partner clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "Voss always said you were thorough. Looks like we'll be needing more of that now." Promotion meant access. I now had full credential clearance to archived reconciliations, partner memos, internal audits. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I also wasn't afraid. That folder wasn't an anomaly. It was a doorway. The kind you don't step through unless you're ready to disappear. The morning Trent's body was confirmed by police, I received a package in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a small glass paperweight shaped like a sailboat. Beneath it, a USB. My name was written on the folded cardstock in tight slanted handwriting I didn't recognize. The message was 1 line long. You know what you saw. Keep going. I ran the USB on a virtual machine in the firm's unused training room. It contained only 1 file, a video clip, low resolution, time-stamped 11 days before Voss's death. In it, I saw him pacing a parking garage, yelling into his phone, "I don't care what they say. They're cooking Roche's numbers. I won't sign another quarter unless I see the original ledger. And if they don't give it to me, I'll walk. I'm not going to jail for them." He hung up, sat in his car, and stared forward in silence. 10 seconds later, he turned, as if someone had just opened the passenger door. The clip ended. Voss had been pushed. Not literally, not physically, but someone had closed in and made sure he wouldn't resist anymore. I spent the next few days cross-checking financial statements against the archived versions I now had access to. There were inconsistencies, tiny ones, but all of them led to Roach Group Holdings, a client too big to lose and too powerful to question. 40 million in phantom assets, audit trails that skipped over entire departments, and one name that kept surfacing: Felix Marrow. Felix wasn't listed in any org charts. He wasn't a partner or a client executive, but I found his name tucked into internal expense memos, vendor payment approvals, and closed-loop consulting contracts. Always small amounts, always approved off-cycle. Someone was siphoning from the firm's biggest accounts, and Felix Marrow was the ghost behind it. I didn't tell anyone. I stopped talking to Ethan. I left Audrey a note saying I might be gone a few days. I rented a studio apartment under a Fake name using a corporate card I flagged from a dead shell vendor that I knew would be written off as travel research. I slept with my laptop in bed. I kept my bag packed. Every morning, I stared at the paperweight on my nightstand and wondered who sent it and when they would come for me. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday at 2:17 a.m. I traced a coded journal entry labeled FM Delta 213X recovery that had been buried in a batch processing report. The note referenced Old Harbor Trust, a dormant investment fund listed in the Cayman Islands. There was no legal reason that trust should have shown up on any Linsket and Row documents, which meant someone was laundering. And I now had the transaction ID. That same night, someone broke into my old apartment. Audrey called in the morning, her voice shaking. "Lana, someone trashed your room. They didn't touch my stuff. Just yours. They took your backup drive. Are you okay?" I lied, said I was fine, that I'd hired a private investigator and this was all just a misunderstanding. By Thursday, I knew who Felix Mero was. He wasn't a contractor. He wasn't a partner. He was the former fiancé of the managing partner's daughter, a man with no financial background, no verifiable credentials, and no official employee record. But he had a badge, and he had access to the same folders I did. I confronted him in the firm's underground parking structure. He was smoking beside a white Jaguar, clearly not expecting to see me. "Lana," he said coolly, "burning the midnight oil again?" "You knew Voss was going to be pushed out," I said. "You set him up." He exhaled smoke, smiled faintly. "Voss had options. He chose the hard road. You're stealing from our largest client and framing it as growth. I'm redirecting capital," he said calmly, "so people like you can stay employed." I walked away. I didn't give him the satisfaction of yelling. I sent a single email to a law firm in DC with a full document dump and copied it to a third-party anonymous leak board. I knew what I'd done would burn every bridge I had. I also knew I couldn't unseen the truth. That night, Ethan showed up at my rental. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press. He just said, "Whatever you're doing, be careful. I think someone's watching you." He kissed me like he wasn't sure he'd get to again. The next morning, I was gone. I left Boston before dawn. The sky was still charcoal gray when my bus pulled out of the terminal. I kept my hood up, phone off, and face turned toward the window as downtown blurred past. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, I had crossed state lines and the city was behind me like a memory I'd packed away and sealed shut. The safe house was a lakeside cottage in New Hampshire. A retired enlist named Nora McGrath owed my late mother a favor. She didn't ask questions when I called, just gave me a code to the back door and directions to keep the curtains drawn at night. The cottage was small and smelled of cedar and old maps. I spent the first few days sleeping like I hadn't in months, the kind of sleep that sinks into your bones and doesn't ask permission. But I didn't come here to hide. I came to trace the rest of the ledger. Felix Mero hadn't just created a false asset flow. He had buried his theft beneath layers of derivative contracts, shell vendors, and algorithmic trading loops disguised as high-frequency reports. It was elegant and ruthless, the kind of fraud that would take years to unravel unless someone like me already knew where to look. Each night, I ran a new simulation, a new scenario that restructured the Roche Holdings books using real-time economic indicators. And every time, the same results surfaced. Someone had extracted close to $68 million from the fund over 3 years and funneled it through Old Harbor Trust. The final transfer occurred the night before Voss died. I kept the USB close. I kept my prints off everything. I used burner devices Nora had stored in her basement freezer, each one air-gapped and factory-wiped. The evidence wasn't just digital anymore. It was blood-stained. And now I have it. What I didn't have was time. On the 5th night, I returned from a walk and found the lights on in the cottage. I knew I'd turned them off. My breath caught. I circled wide around the back, slipped through the kitchen entrance, and moved with silence I'd learned from fear. No one was inside, but my laptop was open, and a single message flashed across the screen. There was no IP trace, no access log, just that sentence, blinking like a warning shot. I shut the system down, stuffed everything into a weatherproof duffel, and left the house before the clock struck midnight. I knew where I had to go. Trent Voss's widow, Rena, Hadn't spoken to the media or shown up to any firm memorials. But someone told me to code myself by name. Told her I worked with Trent. Her eyes tightened. If you came to say something corporate, don't. I came because I think he was killed, I said. That stopped her. She led me to the back office, locked the door, and pulled the blinds. I told her everything. She never interrupted, just listened, jaw clenched, fingers white on the edge of the desk. When I was done, she walked to a cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out a small black notebook. He started keeping notes. I didn't know what they meant. Just letters, numbers, codes. But he said if anything ever happened, I'd know who to give it to. She handed me the book. I took it with both hands. She touched my wrist gently and said, "Don't let them erase him." That night, I drove to a warehouse on the outskirts of Worcester. It was the registered address of Meridian Analytics, a consulting firm listed as one of Roche Group's contractors. The place looked abandoned. I parked 3 blocks away, approached from the rear, and broke in through a rusted service entrance. Inside, the warehouse was quiet, cold, and filled with dust. But near the center, I found a single working server rack behind a false wall. One of the units was hot, recently accessed. I opened the casing and found a secondary drive with a blinking light. I swapped it out for a clone drive I'd brought, and left before the sun rose. What I found on that drive was more than fraud. I found communications, recorded Zoom meetings, email threads, a chain of memos between Felix and several Roche executives, detailing a plan to reroute pension funds into offshore accounts to manipulate stock performance and report artificial growth for quarterly earnings. They weren't just stealing. They were weaponizing people's futures for market leverage, and they were doing it with help from inside Linscott and Rowe, a partner, someone who signed the reconciliation reports each quarter, someone with the power to erase access logs and bury whistleblower complaints before they ever reached legal, someone I knew. I still went. The signature on the final report was Clark Rennell, my mentor, the man who recruited me out of university, who defended me after Charleston, who brought me onto Roche's portfolio after Voss was suspended. He had groomed me to be close enough to see everything but not far enough to run. The realization made me nauseous. I paced the cottage, fists clenched, teeth grinding until my jaw hurt. I remembered every compliment, every offhand warning, every time he told me, "You're smarter than the others. Just be careful where you shine that light." He knew what I'd find. The following morning, Nora called. "You've been compromised," she said. "There was movement on your burner ID last night. Someone tried to ping your IP through a dummy. Log in on the leak board." "How close?" "Close enough. You need to finish this fast." "I'm going back to Boston," I said. "No, Lana. You go back now. You won't make it out." "I'm not going back to work," I said. "I'm going to war." Before I left, I wrote a letter, a sealed file dump with complete encryption and a timed self-release protocol. If I didn't check in within 72 hours, it would be delivered to 5 journalists, 2 federal regulators, and the SEC's Office of Whistleblower Protection. I gave Nora the key. Then I boarded a train. The city was colder than I remembered. The air had that tight metallic feel that meant winter was arriving early. I walked with a limp I didn't know I'd picked up. My breath fogged in front of me like a signal. I didn't call Ethan. Not because I didn't want to, because I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I found Clark in the Sky Tower Club. That was where he held court. A high glass fortress overlooking the city, where scotch cost more than rent and silence could be bought with a glance. He was sitting at the far end of the bar when I walked in, dark suit, tie loosened, expression unreadable. "You're braver than I gave you credit for," he said as I sat down beside him. "You made me brave," I replied. "And you made me angry." He didn't flinch. "I never wanted Voss dead. He was supposed to retire. But he didn't, did he? He got close, like I did." Clark sipped his drink, set it down, and turned to face me fully. "There's a storm coming, Lana. You think the firm will survive this?" "I don't care if it survives. I care if it answers for what it did." His eyes narrowed. "You uploaded it, didn't you?" I didn't respond. He nodded. "Then I suppose we both lose." As I rose to leave, he said one last thing. "You'll never see the end coming. I walked out into the city and didn't look back. That night, I received a message from Ethan. We need to talk. Not over the phone. It's about your mother. My heart stopped. I hadn't told him anything about her. Not where she died. Not what she used to do. Not that she once worked for Linscott and Rowe before she disappeared 20 years ago. And suddenly, everything changed. Ethan's message hit harder than anything Felix or Clark ever said. It shattered the clean walls I'd built in my mind to separate what was personal from what was professional. Because my mother was supposed to have nothing to do with this. She'd been a paralegal. She died in a car accident. That was the story. Neat. Sealed. But Ethan knew something else. And now I need to know it too. We met at the reservoir near Lexington, just after midnight. It was cold. Wind ripped through the tall grass like teeth. He stood with his hands in his jacket, eyes alert, body tense like he wasn't sure if he'd see me or a shadow of who I'd become. I got into Clark's vault, he said, without greeting. It was on a system they buried under 5 layers of encryption. Had to use the chipset you left behind in your apartment. That's why they broke in. What did you find? He didn't speak, just handed me a photo. It was grainy. A woman, seated at a boardroom table, mid-conversation. Her profile was unmistakable. The slope of her nose. The hair coiled into a tight knot. The watch she always wore. It was her. My mother. She was in a board meeting. The caption in the file read, March 3, 2006 Internal Strategy Review. Project Thorn. Linscott and Rowe watermark. Clark Reynolds. Signature. She worked in compliance, Ethan said. But it wasn't legal. It was a special project. Internal containment. I stared at the photo as though I could climb inside it and drag her out. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because she disappeared the day after this meeting. And the file you leaked? It referenced a case Cody named Those 6. That was her last assignment. I sat down on the frozen ground, knees sinking into the dirt. My heartbeat filled my ears. Everything. I thought I knew her death, her job, my own path into this firm. It was all connected. Not a coincidence. A design. What was Project Thorn? Ethan pulled out a small drive. I decrypted what I could. It was a test model for asset reshuffling. Essentially a sandbox version of what Felix turned into a full-scale fraud. The initial whistleblower in that case wasn't Voss. It was your mother. My mother had found what I'd found 19 years earlier. And then she vanished. Is she dead? I don't know. But someone made sure her car was never recovered. We drove back into the city. I didn't sleep. I stared out the window as streetlights flickered by, watching a city that had never once belonged to me reveal itself as something darker, colder, and closer than I ever imagined. By morning I had a plan. The file I sent to the leak board was still encrypted. I'd set it to publish in 72 hours unless I killed the timer. That gave me time to do one final thing. A move so loud it would shake the foundation of Linscott and Rowe and force every hand into the light. I was going to confront Felix Marrow. In public. With evidence. With cameras. And with no way for them to silence me without setting fire to the entire building. The annual shareholder review was scheduled at the Seabright Hotel ballroom. Attendance was restricted to senior partners and key clients. But I still had my badge. I wore a black suit. No jewelry. No phone. Just a micro recorder under my collar, and the original black notebook of Trent Voss in my hand. I entered like I belonged. There Clark was already at the podium, flanked by 2 board executives. Felix stood off to the side, pretending to be staff. But when he saw me, his face changed. Slight twitch. Tiny pull at the corner of his mouth. He motioned discreetly to someone by the exit. I kept walking. The ballroom was set like a war room. Round tables, white tablecloths, soft lighting to ease tension. The real business was happening in glances, in handshakes, in deals already agreed upon in backrooms. I made it to the center aisle before I spoke. My name is Lana Deverux. I'm a senior financial auditor with 6 years on the Roche Holdings account. I have evidence of systemic asset manipulation, pension laundering, falsified contracts, and the silencing of at least 2 whistleblowers, one of whom was found dead. The room turned silent like someone had snapped the power. Clark's face didn't move, but his fingers curled around the podium. Miss Deverux is not authorized to speak, he said calmly. I don't need authorization. I have proof. I raised a notebook and held up a portable projector. This is the forensic audit Trent Voss was working on before he died. The one that TI's Roach Holdings to Old Harbor Trust. The one your firm tried to bury. To security. Guards began to move. I raised my voice. If I am removed or harmed in any way, this data will be released to the SEC, the FBI, and every financial journalist in the country. People froze. Felix stepped forward, smiling like a shark. You're gambling with your life, Lana. I'm not gambling. I'm betting on the truth. He opened his mouth to reply but never got the chance. Behind him, 2 federal agents entered the ballroom, badges raised. One of them called out, Felix Marrow, you're under investigation for securities fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. I didn't plan that part. I never sent anything to law enforcement. But someone else did, later that night. When the building was locked down, Clark was escorted out in silence. Felix resisted. He screamed. I stood still and watched it happen like I was outside my own body. When the ballroom cleared, a woman approached me. She was older. Gray hair pulled into a soft knot. Olive trench coat. Familiar eyes. My heart stopped. She smiled faintly and said, You weren't supposed to go this far. It was her. My mother. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, just stared. She touched my shoulder. You did what I couldn't. You survived it. I thought you were dead. I was. To them, I whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Because they would have buried you next. I've been watching you, and I knew you'd find it. Tears came before I could stop them. We left together, into the night, into a city that finally felt clean. 2 weeks later, Linscott and Rowe was disbanded under federal injunction. The SEC froze over $120 million in disputed assets. Clark Reynolds' hearing was fast-tracked. Felix Marrow disappeared from custody 3 days before trial. The case remains open. I moved to the coast. Ethan joined me. We don't talk much about Boston, or the firm, or the files I still keep locked in a black safe under the floor. Some nights, I dream about Voss, about my mother in that room 19 years ago, about the ledger that started it all. And I wonder how many stories never get told because someone decided silence was safer. But this one got told, and I lived to tell it.